location.
Somalia has been in conflict for more than 25 years. There were always a lot of child soldiers among fighters. Once I spoke to father of child soldier, the Al-Shabaab man was saying, we can give it back to your son, but you have to pay $30 every month. And he said, I can't pay $30. I can't even pay $5. So they forced the son to fight. My husband, Mahmoud Ali Ahmed, established the Elman Peace Center. All around Mogadishu, he had the car repairs, he educated and trained the boys and then hired them. He had a slogan, put the gun, take the pen. Warlords didn't like his idea. In 1996, Elman was killed. I took my three daughters to Canada. I wanted my girls to have education. That's why I was there. But I'm always have in my mind, and I always tell them I'll go back to Mogadishu. In 2007, I came back to Somalia and opened Elman Peace Center again. And then my daughters came one by one. Ilwad now is working with me. When she came, I was happy because she was helping me, but at the same time, I can feel the risk.
There was war, there was mortars everywhere, coming from Canada and just being thrown and all of that was very terrifying. But after a week, I started going to the centers and seeing the work that she was doing, and I understood that people needed her and that she was actually creating change. And just as we needed her, other people needed her.
They learn plumbing, vehicle repair, mobile repair, and other practical skills. Most of them were taken from Al-Shabaab. When you hear Al-Shabaab, you expect the worst. But when you stay with them and see how they are playing and learning, they are just children. They need a chance for a new life.
nimanka tashkiiliye al-shabaab tashkiiliye rag meesha magaalada joogay markay tashkiiliyeen waan raacay ninkii soo bax jihaadka soo gal waan raacay.
There is an agreement in place that any child that is apprehended or captured at the front line or surrenders within 72 hours has to be handed over to our centers. We want to give them an alternative that is peaceful, and less fighters means less fighting.
3 cases of rape that happened in this IDP camp just today.
There are a lot of internally displaced people's camps in and around Mogadishu. Living conditions are awful. People don't have money, food, there's no safety. Armed men come to the camps at night to rob and rape women. But because of fear and stigma, victims of sexual violence don't speak about it. We were able to generate a discussion that never before existed on the extent of sexual violence in Somalia. We were threatened, some of our staff were jailed, but we have made it so that there are now policy changes protecting the rights of women. We opened the Women's Development Center, where survivors of sexual and gender-based violence are rebuilding their lives. This is through skills development, through literacy and other forms of education, through providing safe houses, shelters, through the clinical management of rape and giving them actual access to health services. In case you're a victim of rape and your family or clan disowns you, you can empower yourself with confidence so that you don't need to rely on anyone. I was not going to stay in Somalia, but having worked with my mom, I saw that I was actually helpful and useful, so I stayed. I found purpose here. I found purpose in Somalia.
You can see the change. I just don't want to stay home and do your own family only. But I have so many family now, so many kids who call me mom. Sorry. The work we do is very emotional.
Thank you so much for that really touching video. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Susannah Friedman. I'm the Associate Director of the Humanitarian Policy Focus Area at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. And it's my pleasure to be the moderator of today's event and discussion. I first want to start by thanking everyone for joining us. And I'd also like to thank the Future Studio Discussion platform for hosting this event. Before we start, just a quick reminder for all our participants that we have Armenian translation available on Zoom for this discussion. Should you need it, please just click on the interpretation in meeting options and select the language channel for Armenian. I want also to remind our viewers that you're welcome to send us your questions during the question and answer period. Before we begin, I would like to recognize the passing of Aurora co-founder and member of the Aurora Prize Selection Committee, Fartuun, this past week, and to say that we keep his loved ones and his colleagues in our thoughts. Before we continue, I want to turn to Dean Merritt Janow to join us for some welcoming remarks. Dean Janow?
Thank you very much, Susannah. It's really my great pleasure to be with you today and welcome you. I'm Merritt Janow, Dean of the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia. And on behalf of SEPA, we are grateful to be co-sponsoring today's event with the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative and the Aurora Dialogues. We also acknowledge and mourn the passing of Adan Gregorian. Aurora is a remarkable and important organization, and I think it's undertaking deeply meaningful and inspiring work around the world to address on the ground humanitarian challenges. Conflicts take various forms and create immense human suffering and human challenges. They grow more complex, I think, and varied each day and are increasing. We thought of a world not long ago where such was decreasing, but it has not proven the case. We're deeply grateful for organizations like Aurora for its work to help those in need and recognize those who are brave and are making a difference. In its own words, to risk their lives, health, and freedom to save the lives, health, and freedom of others. How utterly remarkable. We're honored at SEPA to be co-hosting this dialogue with Fartuun Adan in Ilwad, as well as several organizations that have supported your amazing, important work. It's powerful and inspiring to us. For us at SEPA, we've had a long and rich history of working to advance knowledge and understanding of challenges facing populations around the world as a result of conflict and humanitarian crises. And we do this through academic work, by training the next generation of leaders in human rights and humanitarian affairs, and through partnerships with institutions, multilateral organizations, and NGOs around the world. Indeed, many of our faculty have themselves led humanitarian organizations, remain deeply involved with them. And that has been a key part of our school now since its founding 75 years ago, nearly. So I'm very grateful for today's events. I want to give special thanks to Professor Susannah Friedman. Thank you for your leadership of our program as director of our Human Rights and Humanitarian Policy Concentration and moderating today. And thank you all so much for being with us. We look forward to this very important conversation.
Thanks so much, Dean Janow. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers today. We are joined by Fartuun Adan and Ilwad Elman, who are the 2020 Aurora Prize laureates and heads of the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center in Somalia. We're also joined by Sunitha Krishnan, the founder of Prajwala and the 2018 Aurora Humanitarian. Eriksson is the executive director of Love Does, and Emily Warne is the director of strategic partnerships and communications with Panzi Hospital and Foundation. So I welcome you all and thank you for joining us today. For the sake of time, I won't run through the full bios of all of our speakers, but for participants, you can find much more information about all of the really fantastic work that these organizations and speakers are doing through the event posting. And I want to turn us just to some initial questions to start a conversation and hear a bit more from our speakers today. So I was going to ask you to reflect first on what in your particular line of work are the biggest challenges that you see on the horizon at the moment? And I'll just open it up for those of you who want to reflect on this. Sunitha, we're having a little difficulty with your audio. Maybe while we work on fixing that, we could turn to one of the other panelists.
I'll go.
Yes.
So I was reflecting on this because just last week in one of our schools in Congo, we had an eruption of violence. And just learning about how, at the worst case scenario, obviously people are dying from conflict. And then even at the very most minor, there's such disruption in education and wondering, are the kids going to actually come back to school? Are their families going to be displaced or just fearful of something like that happening again? And we can see on the education side, the very real impact that that has in even just lost school time. So that I think is one of the challenges that Ilwad could speak much more to this than I can, but I see that in all of our projects around the world. So yeah, that is one of the challenges. I think it's kind of at the root issues of a lot of the things that we're trying to address. So that's one for me.
Thanks, Day. And I think that's very evocative of some of what we saw in the video at the beginning too. I don't know, Ilwad, if you'd like to reflect a little more on that.
Absolutely. I mean, really just to echo what Day has also mentioned. And first of all, thank you very much for hosting these dialogues. I know I speak on behalf of my mother who's here with us today as well too, that it's a great honor for us to be the 2020 recipients of the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative. But well before that, when we were being considered for the prize in the top 5 in 2017, we've remained in touch with the Aurora community and they've been staunch supporters of our work. And we really do feel that we are part and parcel of the community. So with that, we also grieve heavily the loss of Mr. Gregorian and also send our deepest condolences. The question of, the biggest challenges, it can really be divided between ones that we can see and the ones that we can't see. In Somalia right now, we are facing a political stalemate that's been ongoing since February 8th officially, when the current administration became quote unquote illegitimate. And since then, there's been conflict, there's been protests, there's been armed violence, there's been schools closing down. And a lot of these things have been, as they are historically, disproportionately affecting women and girls. The things that we don't see that are rooted into much of the conflict and challenges in Somalia and are becoming newer topics, but we've always seen the impacts of them include climate, environmental degradation, access to quality care and institutions. And we're seeing that compounded on all of these factors and weak institutions, that there are many problems. And we're just picking at the tip of the iceberg in some of our work, but it is creating some impact. I'd also invite Fartuun to also add some remarks on what some of the biggest challenges are. Mute.
Fartuun, I think you're on mute. Oh, I think Fartuun, you're on mute and we've lost your video. Okay, well, maybe while we are working on some of the connectivity challenges, thank you, Ilwad, particularly for raising the really important cross-cutting issue of gender and the ways in which there are disproportionate impacts across different parts of the population of any given crisis that we're looking at. That's really, I think, a helpful reminder. For all
Okay.
of us. Fartuun, we have you back. Go
Hi.
ahead.
Am I still mute?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be part of this discussion. And to add that with what Ilwad said was the challenge we are facing in Somalia is another level or what we used to have. So still, every night now is we worry, is we gonna fight or we won't fight? We have a Shabab and we have fighting different sectors. We have Corona. So it's a lot of things going on now in Mogadishu. But to go back to what I want to talk about is Aurora Prize. It was we really appreciate how we went this and the whole thing we go through, and they came to us and to see the work we're doing it and to going through all. When they came to us with when doing this video, was a really emotional video, and they saw how we work on the place we were going to. We're really working in the community, so we go places, and it's difficult, especially in this moment now. It's getting harder, but I think we're gonna talk about later on the questions. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your reflections. Emily or Sunitha, I don't know, Sunitha, do we have your audio back now?
Yes, Susannah, thank you so much for your patience. I think the COVID pandemic has been one of the biggest challenges of our work today, because with the vast, devastating impact on the economy, a never before seen migrant crisis, internal displacements of the community due to the pandemic, we have accelerated increase in human trafficking of women and girls, especially for the purposes of prostitution and sex trafficking. And what's very, very frightening is the fact that children and very, very young children are being exploited online sexually. And India has today become one of the biggest content generator of child sexually abusive material during this pandemic. So we're facing a disproportionate situation where the criminals have really kind of made hay while the sun shines kind of a situation, where vulnerability has been exploited to the highest. And today every day we rescue more than 9 to 10 women who are forced into prostitution during this pandemic. So it's a very, very frightening situation. The frightening situation is also because the systems, the entire machinery is collapsing. And so there are fewer and lesser safety nets and protection mechanism available for women and girls to fall back on. So there's a kind of a dead-end situations that we are reaching, with a health emergency, with an economic devastation, with a migrant crisis, and women and girls becoming the pawn in this entire unequal state of crisis. And it's becoming increasingly challenging on how to respond to the systems, because the response system itself is very weak, and the existing system and the existing machinery is unable to handle the consequences of this devastation. And the helplessness with which one looks at a response where we are just scavenging, just trying to touch the periphery of the problem, but not reach anywhere into bringing large term systemic or any.
Oh, I think we're having difficulties with your connection again, Sunitha, but
helplessness is also very scary.
Thanks for those important reflections. And I think a very important reflection for everyone that indeed the COVID-19 pandemic has deepened vulnerability so much for those who were already vulnerable in some fairly profound ways. Emily, from the perspective of Panzi, do you want to speak a little to the challenges that you're facing?
Sure. I mean, I think like all of our organizations, the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly created a lot of challenges. But before COVID-19 hit, the DRC, where Panzi works, was already facing an epidemic of rape as a weapon of war for decades. And I think that right now, as everyone's saying, that disproportionate effect on women and girls, we don't even know what the full extent of the pandemic is going to be on our region and the work that we do, and probably won't for some time. We've been very encouraged by some of the funding that we've seen that looks like it'll be devoted to research and trying to address some of these increased vulnerabilities. But I do think that it'll be some time before we actually have learned exactly the true extent of what has happened. I think that's something that we're all a little nervous about, right? And then I would just say that in the Congo, the problem is so pervasive and widespread that what we're really just looking at is trying to reach survivors wherever they are in last mile communities, making sure that they have access to holistic services. And that requires some political will, both from different aid agencies, governments, change makers, the global community, to really devote time and funding and awareness to building solutions for this. But also we're really focused on implementing mechanisms of transitional justice in the country, because the rampant impunity, the fact that no perpetrators are never punished for their crimes, is one of the reasons why this violence continues to exist. And until some mechanisms of transitional justice are implemented, they'll continue to go unpunished. And it's definitely a challenge that we're seeing right now.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you all for your, I think, really important reflections on the challenges on the horizon at the moment, both those that reflect ongoing challenges that you face in your daily work just because of the nature of the issues that you are confronting in your organizations, but also the new challenges that are arising as a result of the global pandemic and the ways that that is impacting on the ground in the communities that you work with and serve. Having painted what is a fairly grim picture of the situation on the ground, I wonder if I could ask you to shift gears a little bit and tell us if there are reasons to be optimistic. What do you find in the course of your work that that gives you a reason to be optimistic for the future? And perhaps I could turn first to Ilwad.
Well, what's the alternative, Susannah, to not being optimistic? There's so much, I think, still very wrong in the world. There's still so much to be concerned about and so much work that we all have to do, but there is no alternative to optimism and to believing that things can be different, that they can be better than they are today. I'm inspired by all of the women on this panel and the respective work that they're involved with. Some have known longer, some have only been able to follow their work online, but all speaks to itself. And I think that what we have to be optimistic about is that there are so many people around the world that are standing up to changing some of the seemingly intractable conflicts and situations in the world. Women particularly are no longer standing idly by. They're demanding their rights. I think that there are new layers and solidarities of support. And I think even this panel represents that as well too, from programs that are directly in Congo and DRC and Uganda, Somalia, and with representation from people in the US. We're starting to think about these issues as global issues and not localized to local communities only. And that gives me some optimism. I also believe very strongly that now more than ever that young people are being empowered and trusted to be in the front seats of creating some of the change that will impact their generation the most. And yeah, I try to focus on that. I think that's where I find solace. And some reaffirmation when things really do get hard, to be able to continue to do the work.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And I think, clearly the strength of women is very much represented in this panel today as well, very proudly. Fartuun, sorry, were you trying to come in here?
Yes. Also is the work we do. The work we do, it gives you have to work hard. When you see the change, even if you're helping one person or two, then you're thinking, okay, at least someone is getting better, or someone getting something, or they might get a job, or they may have a better life than they have before because of the work we do. That motivates you and gives you a hope to think maybe tomorrow is better, or next year is better. So you're always pushing to your own way to see the change is coming. So you don't want to give up. When you see so many people around you looking at you and say, okay, today we're getting better. So you're thinking tomorrow and next day and next day. So always it's not year, but you're thinking day by day, what we do today and what we're gonna achieve tomorrow. So that motivates you. So every night you have a hope, tomorrow will get better.
Thank you so much. I think that's so right that when faced with really difficult situations, there is a need to hope that the next day might be better. Sunitha, would you like to offer your thoughts on reasons to be optimistic?
I think we have all the reasons to be optimistic, especially during these COVID pandemic times, because I don't think never in the history of humanity we've had, such an open, clear demonstration, surge of humanity who stood up for each other anywhere in the world. And India, very starkly, we had millions of migrant workers going on a distress reverse migration back to the villages. They were walking thousands and thousands of miles to just get back to their village of safety, because they felt COVID in an urban city would kill them. And there were hundreds and thousands and millions of very young people, old people, braving their lives, standing on the highways, feeding these migrants who were running. So, these are not social workers. These are not activists. This is not the state or the system. These were just common people, and pandemic was everywhere. Yet they stood up. And today you saw that in this crisis, that there is hope in humanity. And, if the need arises, humanity as a whole will stand up. And that is something that all of us have seen in different parts of the world. And I've seen it very, very clearly. Another thing that I see, in recent times and more recently is that there is a zero tolerance that is becoming very clearly demonstrated to violence and any form of violence, and more so, violence against women and girls, the Me Too movement, and a whole lot of things that comes in the last few years are reasons for optimism that today there is a growing intolerance to any form of gendered violence. And there are more and more advocates speaking up. There's more and more silence on this issue that is broken. And that for me is a great, great, ray of optimism with which I build all my mission around.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I think we all do remember very well the images of what was happening with the sort of reverse migration in India, and how heartening it is to know that neighbors and strangers came out to help one another during difficult times. Day, maybe I could turn to you next.
Yes, well, this call is heartening for one thing. I love hearing about all these different perspectives, and I have been thinking about the resilience of people, and it never gets old seeing how people who have gone through something so difficult are still so hopeful, and they're fighting for peace, and they're fighting for their lives and for progress. And I see such a genuine desire for change, and I think that's something I've realized, and I see it in big ways and small. In one of our safe houses in Uganda, for example, we have girls who have survived sexual violence, and now they're in law school. or they're in medical school. And it's incredible to me to think that these are young women who have had an incredibly difficult upbringing, have gone through something so hard, and yet it hasn't stopped them. So I think seeing the resilience and that really real genuine desire of communities and countries to change for the better is really encouraging to me, in the midst of it sometimes feeling very overwhelming. And just realizing that investing in people and hope and peace has such an incredible return on investment. So I think lately that's what has been encouraging me, despite the feeling now and then that it can be a little bit overwhelming. So, and working with Ilwad and Fartuun has been one of the best examples I could think of for that, visiting the work that they're doing and meeting the young women who are just incredible. I get that very real reminder, which is really helpful to kind of bolster that work to continue.
Thanks so much. And Emily, maybe I can turn to you from the perspective of Panzi.
Yeah, thank you. Much like Day, I'm just so encouraged every day by the stories from our survivors and how they're able to rebuild their lives after, experiencing something, truly what other people could see as insurmountable challenges. Very similar sort of success stories to what Day is also mentioning. We have a nurse at our hospital who was gang raped and, had to undergo, I think, 17 surgeries to repair herself physically. She had no education before she reached Panzi's doors and is now a nurse at our hospital, giving back to her sister survivors. And those stories, sitting from my office here in the United States, how can I not do everything that we can to support the incredible work of my Congolese colleagues on the ground, who are the true heroes, right? They are the ones who are doing this incredible work in the face of, active conflict or a lack of infrastructure and epidemics. And it really is just, if they can find the strength every day to keep going, then obviously here we have to as well. But speaking from their perspective, having had conversations with them about how do you get up every day and continue to hear these horrific stories and these testimonies from these women and help them rebuild their lives. And it's because they just find such a motivation in seeing the light in these women's eyes return after they've been able to undergo a holistic healing model that really gives them their future back. So it's I can't really speak to what motivates me because it's obvious, right? It's them and the survivors. But I will also just say that I'm also encouraged by sort of the global community, like Aurora, having these conversations with Fartuun and Ilwad and other change makers about how we can collaboratively work to solve some of these issues. It's been a really great experience knowing that there are people all over the world who are thinking about these women and girls in Congo.
Thanks so much, everyone, for your thoughts. I mean, I hear you all saying repeatedly how much witnessing the resilience of people experiencing hardship gives you strength and hope for the future, but also this very important point around connecting globally around communities of practice and learning and finding strength in others who are doing similar types of work is a source of strength. So I wanted to turn us a little bit to a different question, which is to ask you to tell us what you think, based on all of the challenges that you face and the reasons that you find for optimism, what do you think the future of your work will look like and the future of your organizations will look like in 10 years? If you could sort of crystal ball gaze into the future, what do you think is going to be the same? What do you think is going to be different? What might be some of the forcing factors around that? And maybe I can start this time with Sunitha.
Susannah, I do hope that in 10 years from now, we should close shop. That is what I would dream of. What 10 years from now, even tomorrow, I would like to close shop, because no woman, no girl, no child is getting sold into sex slavery, and we don't need to be running our organizations and our work. That is the dream that one has for one day, 1 year, 10 years, any day. But since that is not going to happen, what I see 10 years from now is a more cohesive global humanitarian body which is unanimous in its consensus that no form of violence on any human being will be tolerated, and a whole global community which believes in the collective strength of doing collaborative efforts to make that happen. Not individuals sitting in different silos, and doing whatever they can, but as one global community, as one humanitarian group, which believes, as a non-negotiable that violence in any form is not acceptable, and not just in thoughts and beliefs, but in their action too. These dialogues that we are having right now, and for which Aurora has created such a beautiful platform, ever grateful for this, are small steps towards that larger vision of our work, where we together fight through our strengths and collectivize our strength, whether in Congo or in the US or in Somalia, and bring together as one force. I see that in 10 years from now.
Thanks so much. Thank you for those reflections. And I love this idea of a sort of zero tolerance for violence future. Emily, maybe thoughts from Panzi.
I mean, a very similar sentiment that if we've worked ourselves out of a job, that would be wonderful. I don't think that in 10 years we'll have eradicated rape as a weapon of war, but what I do hope we'll have made some very positive improvements on will be expanding access to care throughout the country and reaching survivors wherever they are through the replication of our holistic heal model. And also I hope that we will have made some progress on that transitional justice piece that I mentioned earlier, so that perpetrators in Congo will be held accountable for the violence and destruction they inflict on their communities.
Thank you. Really helpful to hear what some of the sort of enabling ways forward would look like in terms of reaching those accountabilities. Fartuun, would you like to offer your thoughts on the future of Elman in 10 years?
Yes, my hope in 10 years will be have a peace and have a justice, and women who suffering can go to have a fair justice and not to worry about it. To say if something happened to me, I'm gonna go to the police or to have a justice fairly, not want to use care of it. And overall, to have a peace and women have a freedom and to speak out and to do whatever they wish to do, instead of worrying who's gonna be or someone dictating you what to do. To have that freedom just to do whatever they want to do. That's what I'm hoping.
Thank you. Yeah, freedom is certainly a worthwhile aspiration to feel that liberty. Ilwad, do you want to offer any additional reflections on that?
I mean, the remarks that Fartuun made are what we hope for. And similar to what Sunitha said, if that could happen today or tomorrow, the sooner the better. But to be honest, I feel that a lot of the hard-won gains that have been made over the last 10 years are at threat right now. So we're in a perpetual state of 10 steps forward, 10 steps back, and almost, constantly trying to hold on to just a little bit of the improvements that we're making. So I foresee, and this is sometimes my, optimist or my idealist masquerading as an optimist pragmatism, where I see Somalia right now in a pinnacle time of great concern. And our hope remains the same, that we can continue to provide the services that are not being delivered by the state currently. I hope that women and girls can feel safe in our facilities, that we can continue to work with the government, whatever government comes into place, because we currently don't have definitively on what that process looks like right now. To hold perpetrators to account in 10 years, and also to pressure the international community to also put in place unequivocal, hard legal boundaries on these issues and resolutions and declarations that we celebrate every year, but don't look at how much of the rhetoric is also matched with resources and actual accountability. So I think the next 10 years will be very busy, but I am encouraged by the number of actors in this space that are willing to show up and fight every day for these ideals.
Thank you so much. And again, for talking about what the sort of enabling factors need to be in order to move forward. Day, would you like to offer any reflections to sort of close us out on this question?
Sure. You know, I would love to see a little bit more of this sustainability model. And it's actually something that Ilwad and Fartuun and I have talked a lot about in starting some of these projects that Aurora is doing in Somalia that we were able to do together. And I think, like a lot of you, I kind of wish that we're all out of jobs in 10 years, that we're doing something else because this is no longer needed. But knowing that that's probably not going to be the case, I would hope that we can put in place some systems that would allow a greater invincibility to families and to individuals and to women from some of the effects of conflict and from war. If we can help individuals be a little bit more insulated from some of these direct threats, if we can sort of push out the boundaries of where these rebel groups are attacking, if we can create schools that continue to run despite our funding going up or down or our involvement, projects like that I see having a really big long-term impact, because it really puts the initiative in the hands of the people, the stakeholders of it, the people who are actually benefiting from these programs. And the more that we can do to empower people to have that strength, I think that that's going to be their best bet. So I would love to see, you know, someone who is able to resist, like we've watched in the video, how Fartuun was describing the story of someone who would have to pay money to not be in this group. Would love to see that person is already, you know, their parents have a job and they're secure, they're in school, they've been educated about the risks of these things, and then there's enough safety and security just to fight back a little bit more against that. Like, I see us reacting a lot of times to all the effects of conflict, and we're all here for it, right? This is what we do, but I would just love to see us do that a little bit less and build more systems. So that's what I'm hopeful for. And I think, like we've talked about, you can only be hopeful. There's really no other option. And I think we're going to be facing a lot of different challenges over the next 10 years. And we're going to have to just really stay strong and stay in it.
Thanks. So thank you all so much. I know you've offered some really important reflections on the challenges ahead, the enabling mechanisms and structural changes that need to be in place in order to facilitate better, more impactful work moving forward. I'm sure that a lot of our participants are wondering how ordinary people can support you. How can ordinary people support those who are doing work on the ground and those who are delivering this incredible humanitarian work? What can they do to support you moving forward? And maybe Ilwad, I can turn to you first.
There's so many ways that, you know, people can get involved. The simplest or the easiest might be to actually engage with, you know, the advocacy, the content that we're putting out there, and help amplify. A lot of times activists that are in context of conflict, there's a limitation to the extent of which they can talk about certain issues, but having that layer of support and that level of solidarity and creating a ripple effect is helpful. I'll give you a recent example. The Somali parliament tried to introduce a sexual intercourse bill, which essentially would legalize child marriage in response to a sexual offenses bill that would punish perpetrators of sexual violence. So they completely abandoned that one and proposed something abhorrent. We started a Kill the Bill movement on social media. It had thousands, more than 50,000 signatures from people around the world, started to name and shame parliamentarians until the people that signed that bill and were part of the process started to backtrack because they were put on the hot spot. So amplifying advocacy is a really big role that they can take. Sharing knowledge. There's a lot of capacity gaps. what we've known now more than ever is that we don't need to see each other in person to interact, to learn from each other in this new digital world that we're all living in. And I think that people that have skills to offer can always volunteer, can mentor, can support with the skills that they have from the comfort of their home. And that's something that we're always looking for. And, you know, I think fundraising is always a really big element of trying to support us to be able to do the real work, particularly when they don't fit in the nice, neat boxes of funding that donors traditionally are used to. But when we want to be more explorative, more reactive to the situation at the ground, and innovative in our solutions, we also need individual people who get it. And I think that there's a lot of ways that people can support, and we try to the extent to our ability to open it up as much as possible, because even doing good has so much bureaucracy, and we want to break down those silos so that individual people, young people, students, people that even just want to send words of support and love can do so.
Great, thanks for those great ideas about how just everyday people can support. Would anyone else like to offer their thoughts on this question?
I do.
Yes, please.
Also, I would like to add to that is that education is the key. I believe when someone have education, they can protect themselves. At least they can speak to themselves. So the work we're doing now, I'm building thanks for the Aurora Prize, we're building the academic schools for girls, and we want them to have education. And that education is not only supporting us for the way Ilwad she was saying, technology. You can have a supporting for the teachers, the supporting for the people who can help the schools we're building in rural area, we're building it, we have in Mogadishu. So all these schools we're building is for girls. And we're doing that because in Somalia, all schools are private. And a lot of people, they can't pay that. So the opportunity they have, the family, they always prefer the boys. So that's why we have so many young girls who doesn't have an education, and they believe what they only hear the family. So they don't know much around the world. So to have people who having the freedom lives, how they live, what the real life is, to educate them and sharing stories and telling them this is the way it should be, I think it is a support, and having this education is very important to us.
Thank you. Emily, Day, Sunitha, would anyone else like to offer thoughts on what everyday people can do to support efforts on the ground?
Sure.
Oops, sorry. Let's
go ahead, Day. You go.
You just have to ask one person.
Sorry. Okay, let's go with Day and then Emily and then Sunitha.
Okay, perfect. So we get this question a lot. We're based here in the States, and in particular, there's a lot of young people who connect with kind of the mission and the work of what we're doing. And it can be a tricky question to answer, especially for us. We are based in the States, but all of our programs are international. And especially focusing in areas that are either recovering or current conflict zones. We're not sending people to those areas. So it's always an interesting way to figure out, how do you really mobilize people if they can't be directly part of the work? And I think just showing that, being a stakeholder in this is just as important as being on the ground. So if it is like hosting a fundraiser, if it's telling your friends about this work, perhaps it's educating yourself on the issues of trafficking in persons, if it's the effects of war and conflict, that's a really good starting place. And then I always encourage people, in addition to wanting to get involved in the work that we do per se, or any of these other organizations, find one in your local community, because then also makes it really real. And then it's sort of a jumping off platform. If you're, helping out with your neighbors down the street or your local community center, it kind of gives you that taste of the rewards of it as well, of connection. And then it sort of spurs you on to realize that the world is a pretty small space when you think of it. And we are so connected. And like Ilwad was saying, the opportunities to connect with people around the world on Zoom and FaceTime and all these ways can make you realize that your neighbors can also be across the world. So I always encourage people to start in your local community, get educated on some of these issues that you're passionate about, and then, you know, fundraising or perhaps even donating a very small amount collectively has a huge impact in being able to help individuals who need it the most in really important times.
Thanks, Day. Sorry, Emily, did you want to go ahead?
Sure. I don't have anything particularly more innovative than just to echo everything that our previous panelists had said. You know, here in the United States, what we do is fundraising and advocacy. We're not implementing the work on the ground, but we're trying to raise awareness and raise financing to support that very important work happening in Congo. So very similarly, we are always just encouraging people to learn about the root causes of these problems and this violence. We have a curriculum that was developed with one of our partners about sexual violence in Congo and around the world, about our founder, Dr. Dennis Mukwege. So encouraging, you know, teachers and students to really build a movement of helping their students to really, in their community, to really understand. We're always really encouraged by the creativity of people who do want to put together fundraisers for us. Just this year, we've had women who have run races on Christmas, dressed up like Santa to raise money. We've had DJs in Canada putting together a socially distanced dance party. And all of these things, in addition to, you know, raising that very crucial unrestricted funding, like Ilwad said, which helps us to respond to emergencies proactively or be a little bit more innovative in the projects that we're doing. It really does add up. And it's always just very inspiring to see that people are donating their time as well as their funds to helping us put together these fundraisers, these events to build awareness in their community. And what we are here to do is to support that and provide them with any resources they can to make that a success. And then the only other thing that I'll add is, you know, donating time, donating, you know, money, but your skills as well. You know, we've had some really phenomenal interns and people who just reached out to us and then heard about this in a news article and said, I have to do something to help. And I don't have the personal funds to be able to donate to you right now, but what I do have is a skill set in X, Y, and Z. Can I help you? And that can be very, I mean, it is very helpful in making sure that, I mean, it reduces your overhead, any number of things. And I just think that if anybody is really passionate about this and wants to get involved, just, you know, shoot us an email. We'll see what we can do. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. And maybe Sunitha, I'll turn to you for the last word on what everyday people can do to help your efforts.
Susannah, you know, sexual violence and sex trafficking happens everywhere in the world. It's a global problem. And therefore, I think there are three things that each one of us and anybody should be doing. One is to break the silence on this issue, which all of us can, but the silence has to be broken from our own families. We need to start speaking up about sexual abuse in our own families, and that is where we create a zero tolerant world to any form of sexual violence against women and children. It has to start within our own families, and each one of us is responsible for that. But today, you know, in this technological world, you can break your silence through Twitter, through Facebook, through Insta, through all the platforms you have. You don't need to be a journalist. You don't need to be an activist. You can be just a common person and say that this is not acceptable. So please break your silence. The second thing I would say is anybody, any human being is vulnerable to be sexually violated today, online or offline. And therefore, you know, start gathering information and skills to safeguard yourselves. What is online safety? What is mobile safety? How do you none of us, you know, working on the field, trying to fight the problem wants to see any of your inside as a victim. Each one of us prays that there will not be one more victim into this whole space. So, you know, and the only way that you will never become a victim is when you start safeguarding yourself and know what are the dangers lurking around you online and offline, and get the information, get the skills to do that. And the third thing, like all my colleagues said, is find ways to respond. And your responses could be anything from fundraising to giving your time, your skills, but most importantly, stand in solidarity. And that's the greatest kind of act of response that you can give for those frontliners, for those people who are standing in the front and fighting for all of us. Be sure to stand in solidarity and say that you believe in them, you trust them, because one of the greatest challenges, which I did not mention when I was talking about challenges in.
Oh, I think we may have lost Sunitha's audio again, but some very important reflections about local action, educating ourselves, breaking the silence, amplifying advocacy, and of course, and importantly, supporting fundraising efforts for all of this important work to actually move forward on the ground. I think we might have time for one question from participants, if there is anything. Okay. Well, perhaps we have covered so much ground in our discussion today that that folks are processing all of what they have heard. So I think we've learned a lot today about some very important work that's taking place on the ground, and heard from a remarkably active, strong, and proud group of women moving that work forward. So thank you so much for your reflections and all of the work that you do. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for taking time to share your stories today, and also to the audience for watching and listening. I hope you all stay healthy and safe. Thank you to the Aurora group for hosting us, and to the Future Studio. And I hope everyone has a good day, good evening, depending on where you are. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Ilwad and Fartuun, as well. We're so grateful to be part of this partnership with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Susannah, for moderating this wonderful dialogue.
My pleasure.